Undercover boss grabs breakfast, freezes when the waitress admits she's working hungry. On a foggy late autumn morning, when the city was still half asleep, John, the founder of the famous Sunrise Diner chain, put on his old worn-out coat, pulled down the faded cap over his brow, and quietly stepped out into the street. The man once hailed as a symbol of startup success was now doing something he had long forgotten, walking directly into the real world, where financial reports weren't polished with glittering numbers. The Sunrise Diner he was about to visit wasn't a place unfamiliar to him. It was the very heart of the entire brand, the place where he used to personally wipe down each table, work the kitchen on busy days, and smile as he saw the last guests off under the dimming lights. But now, everything remained only on those cold, lifeless reports. The praises for sustainable growth, the steadily increasing revenues, everything looked stable on paper. And yet, deep down, John couldn't shake a gnawing sense of unease. He had heard the whispers of discontent, declining food quality, indifferent service, a stifling work environment, and John knew it was time he saw it for himself. That morning, he walked through the dusty glass doors of Sunrise Diner, unnoticed by anyone. His eyes quietly scanned every familiar corner of the restaurant, every chair, every look in the employees' eyes. And right there, in that misty morning, he knew this visit would change everything. The diner wore a thin shroud of morning fog, faint sunlight struggling to pierce through the grime-covered windows. John sat silently at his usual spot by the window where he used to spend mornings filled with hope in those early days of building his dream. In his hands was the humble menu he once proudly designed, a breakfast that warms the soul. Without hesitation, he ordered the classic crispy toast and a strong black coffee, items that had once made Sunrise Diner's name. A short while later, a young waitress approached. She wore a faded, worn apron, and the fragile smile on her lips couldn't hide the deep sadness in her tired eyes. She set the plate down gently, bowed slightly, and quietly walked away, her petite figure seeming lost amidst the crowded yet cold atmosphere. As John lifted his coffee, he heard her soft voice from behind the counter, a whisper, likely meant only for the colleague standing nearby. "I'm starving, haven't had a bite all morning, and even after my shift, I don't think I'll have enough to buy breakfast." The coffee cup in John's hand suddenly felt unbearably heavy. The warmth from the cup seemed to vanish, replaced by a biting chill. He looked down at the plate of toast before him, stiff, cold slices, no longer carrying the rich, buttery aroma of the past. The very dish he had once been so proud of now stood as a bitter reminder of the values he was losing. At that moment, all those perfect reports and the straight lines of profit graphs he had once been so proud of suddenly became meaningless. And John understood more clearly than ever. Behind that glossy paint, the house of sunrise he had painstakingly built was rotting away day by day. And it was him, the founder, the man who once vowed that no one under his roof would go hungry, who had distanced himself from that reality for far too long. In the days that followed, Michael no longer returned to his luxurious office. Instead, he quietly went back to reality, to the very creation he had once been so proud to build. But day after day, the curtain of truth was slowly drawn back, exposing the dark corners he had never dared to imagine. Early morning. John, looking humble and burdened with heavy thoughts, arrived at the diner before the first rays of sunlight could slip through the dusty windows. The staff shuffled in, their footsteps dragging, faces weary, deep fatigue etched into their young features. The cheerful greetings of old had vanished, replaced by indifferent nods and the harsh sound of chairs scraping against the floor in the heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Midday. The diner was crowded, but gone was the lively laughter. From a familiar hidden corner, Michael silently observed. Plates of dry, brittle toast were hurriedly served, the slices cold and crumbling like sand. The coffee was thin as colored water, its frothy surface disappearing in a blink, leaving only a bitter aftertaste at the back of the throat. On the digital menu board, the prices stood arrogantly high, as if mocking the pride of those still working there. Behind the counter, Garethi branch manager coldly repeated his soulless directives. Cut the butter in half, reduce the jam portion, dilute the coffee, the customers won't notice. Collect all the tips into the internal fund. Anyone with complaints knows where the door is. Late afternoon. Then came the moment that left Michael choked with emotion. In the fading sunlight filtering through the grimy window, he saw the young waitress again, small and fragile, her worn apron clinging to her thin figure, quietly curled up in a cramped corner of the kitchen. In her hands was a hard, dry piece of bread. She bit off tiny morsels, as if trying to soothe the hollow emptiness of her stomach after a day of exhaustion. Beside her lay a crumpled overdue rent notice, the red numbers glaring like knife wounds to the heart. Her battered phone flickered to life with a cold, heartless message. Power cut warning, effective tomorrow. End. And then, as if she'd long grown used to swallowing her sadness, the girl took a deep breath, adjusted her frayed apron, stood up, and bowed gently to the customers with a faint smile. A weak but resilient smile, as if no matter how many storms she faced, she still wanted to hold on to that last flicker of hope. Michael stood as still as a statue, his hands clenched so tightly they turned pale, his heart tightening painfully. In that moment, all the perfect numbers on those reports suddenly became meaningless. He realized that Sunrise Diner didn't lack customers. It had lost the very people who once gave their hearts and their youth to this place. And amidst the silent whispers, Michael made a vow to himself. I've let this place fade into darkness for far too long, but from this very moment, I will reignite the light it truly deserves. Under the heavy air filled with buried emotions, every broken sound seemed louder than ever. As the twilight fell and the sky turned a faint orange, Michael remained standing motionless, but deep inside, a storm of determination had already begun to rise. A sudden clatter echoed from the kitchen. A metal tray fell onto the cold tile floor, producing a sharp, jarring sound that startled everyone. And yet, strangely, no one scolded, no one reacted harshly. There was only a heavy silence, as if everyone had become too accustomed to failure and resignation. John turned his gaze toward the sound and saw Herth, small, frail girl with trembling hands, quickly picking up the tray, trying to hide her tears behind her messy hair. Though her hands were red and burning from touching the hot tray, she bowed her head to the guests with a faint, apologetic voice, then quietly continued working as if nothing had happened. But John knew the light in her eyes was fading. He couldn't bear it for even a second longer. Late that night, with only a few scattered customers left, John quietly left his familiar hidden corner and walked slowly toward the exit. But instead of leaving, he stood at the doorstep, gazing up at the old, flickering Sunrise Diner sign. His hand clenched, then slowly relaxed. A decision had been made. At dawn the next morning, before the first rays of sunlight broke through the dusty windows, John was already at the diner. But this time, he wasn't just an observer anymore. Pinned proudly on his chest was a name tag. John, CEO and founder. He called an emergency meeting, and for the first time in years, the walls of Sunrise Diner echoed with the voice of the man once known as the one who brought the dawn. And from that very moment, the flame he vowed to reignite was officially lit. But would his next actions be enough to dispel the darkness of all these past years? Would that long-awaited dawn finally arrive as he dreamed, or would it remain an unfulfilled promise? The air inside was thick, as if the entire space was holding its breath before a storm. The staff stood quietly in rows, eyes filled with worry and uncertainty. Rumors of an unprecedented emergency meeting had spread since early morning, but no one expected that, at exactly 9 a.m., the person who would step through that door was none other than Michael Carterthy, legendary founder. He no longer appeared as the quiet man under a worn-out coat. Today, he stood tall in an elegant gray suit, exuding a composed and dignified presence. Pinned to his chest was a gleaming name tag, Michael Carter, CEO, founder, Sunrise Restaurant Group. The entire hall fell silent. Gary, the branch manager, stood frozen behind the counter, his face pale as a sheet, hands trembling uncontrollably. The young waitress, the one who had occupied Michael's thoughts for days, stood quietly in the corner of the hall, her hands tightly clutching the frayed edges of her worn apron. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but somewhere within them, a faint glimmer of hope still flickered. Michael stepped onto the stage. His voice rang out, warm yet unwavering, each word striking through the stifling air like the tolling of a solemn bell. Sunrise Diner was built by my own two bare hands, with a simple dream to create a place where each day could begin with hope. But today, as I stand here, I must face the greatest disappointment of my life. I have let that flame die out for far too long. He gestured toward the screen. The large monitor lit up. Raw and undeniable truths played out before everyone's eyes. Footage of Gary casually accepting envelopes from a supplier. Cheap, low-quality ingredients being quietly pushed into the storage room. A chilling recording echoed throughout the hall. Cut the butter, reduce the jam. Water down the coffee, they won't notice. Tips, gather them all into the internal fund. Anyone who doesn't like it can find their way out. The room seemed to freeze in place. Stunned, disbelieving eyes turned toward the stage. Michael turned, his gaze sharp as a blade, locking directly onto Gary. Gary, Do you have anything to say before I sign your termination right here and now? Gary lowered his head, sweat streaming down his forehead. He stammered a few incoherent words and then fell silent. Without hesitation, Michael pulled a pen from his breast pocket and signed the dismissal letter with a firm stroke. Cost-cutting will never be an excuse to trample on human dignity. From this moment, you are officially dismissed. And to those who have enabled this decay, you have two choices. Step out that door or stay and rebuild this place with me from the ground up with respect, kindness, and integrity. Michael stepped down from the stage, striding directly to the young woman. His voice softened, deep and filled with emotion. Why didn't you leave this place sooner? The girl smiled faintly, a sorrowful smile, but in her eyes was a sky full of unshakable strength. Because I still hoped that one day this place would be warm again, like the family breakfast everyone once dreamed of. Michael stood motionless, gripping the girl's hand as if to give her strength. He pulled a bank card from his jacket pocket and gently placed it into her hand. There's $50,000 on this card. This isn't a gift, it's an apology. And more than that, it's an investment in the courage and dignity you've held on to through the darkest of days. He turned away, his voice resonating powerfully across the entire hall. Starting today, I officially announce a complete reform program, Sunrise Reborn. And Sheh, the one who never gave up her faith in this place, will be the first to join our executive management training program. One day, not far from now, I hope she will stand right here, inspiring future generations. Thunderous applause erupted, long and unending. But it wasn't just applause for celebration, it was the sound of a new era beginning, where kindness and human dignity would be restored, where the light of a true dawn had returned to Sunrise Diner. Amidst the overwhelming applause, the young girl bowed her head. Tears silently streamed down her cheeks, but these were no longer tears of sadness. They were tears of releases, if every burden, every suppressed sorrow, every day of silent endurance had been lifted at that very moment. John slowly walked down the aisles, his gaze pausing on each face beyond those who had stood by silently, who had suffered quietly, believing their voices were too small to be heard amidst the harsh machinery of the system. He stopped in front of an older kitchen worker, a man who had silently stayed up countless nights preparing food, knowing no one would ever acknowledge his effort. John gently placed a hand on the man's shoulder, his eyes filled with deep respect. No one here is invisible anymore. From today on, every person will be heard and will rightfully receive the good they deserve. Oh, then, a moment unfolded that touched every heart in the room. A young kitchen helper, the youngest worker in the diner, slowly stepped toward Emma, her bright, tearful eyes shining. "Miss, can I be like you one day?" Emma knelt down, took the little girl's hands gently, and smiled warmly. "You don't have to be like anyone else. Just keep hope alive in your heart, and tomorrow will come to you in the way you deserve most." Behind them, the gentle melody of a familiar piano tune began to play, the very song that once echoed through Sunrise Diner during its earliest mornings. A song whose lyrics John himself had written back when he sat alone in his tiny cafe, dreaming of building a place where people wouldn't just come for breakfast but to find warmth for their souls. And then, the cafe doors swung open. The first light of dawn flooded into the main hall, no longer blocked by dusty glass panes. Golden rays of sunlight shone directly onto the brand new sign displayed proudly above the counter. Sunrise Reborn, where every day is a new happy beginning. John stood by the tall window on the upper floor, his eyes gazing far down the bustling street. The morning breeze swept gently past, carrying with it the sweet scent of pancakes and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the cheerful chatter below. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting every sound, every breath of a rejuvenated Sunrise Diner fill his senses. And when he opened them again, his eyes held nothing but serenity and deep contentment. His voice rose, calm and full of pure happiness. There was no need to steel himself any longer. This is the dawn I always dreamed of. And with that dawn, a new chapter of Sunrise Diner officially began, a place where happiness was born from life's simplest moments, where human values were honored, and where even the smallest glimmers of hope could light up the entire sky. Gone were the weary sighs that used to fill the early morning shifts. In their place, the main hall now rang with joyous laughter and eyes sparkling with happiness. The warm scent of pancakes mingled with the bold aroma of coffee, drifting through every corner like a silent promise of brighter beginnings. On the central stage, beneath the glowing new sign that read, "Sunrise Reborn, where every day is a new happy beginning," stood the same girl who once huddled silently in the dark corner of the kitchen. Now, she wore her crisp new uniform proudly, her name badge gleaming. Emma Williams, assistant general manager. Her face shone brighter than ever before, no longer marked by hardship, but glowing with the strength and confidence of someone who had walked through the darkest nights and emerged into the light. Emma's voice rang out gentle, yet steady and powerful, like the first rays of morning chasing away the clouds. There were days when I didn't even have enough for breakfast, living off whatever leftovers I could find. But there was one thing I never let go of: hope. I believed that no matter how dark the sky became, the dawn would always come. And today, I'm not standing here to recount hard times, but to tell you this: if you can still hold on to hope, you already have a new beginning in your hands. Applause broke out like waves crashing onto the shore. It wasn't just a celebration, it was an affirmation of a new era, where everyone would be respected, heard, and free to dream again. Up on the rooftop, through the wide-open glass windows welcoming the morning sun, John stood silently, his gentle eyes gazing down at the bustling cafe below. Familiar faces, those who had once walked away in disappointment, had now returned, holding steaming cups of coffee and wearing bright, genuine smiles. A pair of elderly guests, the very first customers of Sunrise Diner, sat by the window, quietly holding hands, lost in a moment of sweet nostalgia. A soft breeze swept by, carrying the rich aroma of golden, freshly baked pastries, blending with the bold scent of coffee in the warm morning sunlight. John closed his eyes, letting every sound, every fragrance seep deep into his soul. When he opened them again, a profound peace radiated from his gaze. With a faint, contented smile, he whispered to himself, but it felt as if his words reached out to embrace the entire world. This is the dawn I always dreamed of. You can build a magnificent empire, but if you forget the value of people, it is nothing more than a castle built on sand. A sustainable business isn't built on cold, hard numbers. It's built on hearts that have been warmed, dreams that have been rekindled, and lives that have found happiness because of you. Because in the end, the greatest legacy you can leave behind isn't a fortune of wealth, but the lives you've touched with kindness and compassion,